Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. This is Fallout 4. We're going to be playing this on the Aya Neo. This is running AMD's 4500U, their Renoir platform. I'm going to be playing Fallout 4 here. This is the vanilla version. I don't have any mods whatsoever, so if you wanted to run low-spec mods or something like that to further increase performance at lower TDPs, that's something that you can entertain. I'm going to be looking at this from the angle that it's from a general user standpoint. They just want to play, so I'm going to show you how to do that. The only tool that I'm using here is the Renoir mobile tuning. This itself is a free tool that leverages Rise and Adjust, which is a command line utility that you could also use without having to use this GUI utility to script out stuff. So that might be a video that I do later on. I've digressed a little bit. You can see right here that I've set 10 watt TDP. So we're currently set at 10 watt TDP. Going any lower like I did for Grand Theft Auto 5 got 6 watt. Frame rate really isn't good. So I'm going to be targeting, I click support accidentally. I'm going to be targeting 10 watt TDP. So right now, the only thing I've done is I clicked on the low detail preset and I've changed one variable. So if we go to advanced ambient occlusion, this was actually set to SSAO. I have turned it off because we will get a performance boost there. Everything else is not as low as it can possibly go. Technically, the low preset is not as low as it can go. It's slightly above low. Turning off ambient occlusion will help us there a bit. So let's go ahead and dive into the game. Alrighty, so we are now in game. You can see that we're getting a pretty consistent 30 FPS. It'll drop a slight bit, but for the most part, we'll hover at a 30 FPS console-like experience. And again, we're running at 10 watt TDP right now. So let me go ahead and just point that out for you. So right over here, you can see it's saying 8.9 watt. This is actually a 10 watt TDP. Down here, you can see our total power. This is the amount of power that is for the entire system to run right now. So the display, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RAM, SSD, the CPU and GPU, all of that, the amount of power that is being pulled from the battery is 13.5 watt right now, 13 watt right now. So it's kind of fluctuating a bit. What that means to you is basically in this particular arrangement, we have about 3 hours and change, about 3 hours and 15 minutes of battery life here. So in this particular 10 watt TDP setting, you would have 3 hours and 10 minutes, let's just say, before you get a notification, maybe 3 hours before you get a notification, but that's a solid amount of playtime on a handheld device. That is what I can really consider to be a average amount, not a fantastic amount, but an average amount of playtime on a handheld. 2 hours really being the absolute minimum that I care to entertain. But this is a pretty good setting, and also look at the quality of what's going on here. So there is actually a ton of all of these like little branches and stuff should be highlighting to you guys like terrible aliasing. But remember, we're not doing any lower resolutions. We are resolving at a full 800p here. So technically, a lot of the stuff we do have an anti-aliasing filter on, and it is doing some considerably good work because it's doing a good job smoothing out all those harsh edges in these branches. This is a pretty good scene to kind of look at just to see what's going on. Even when we take a look at this brush thing, it's pretty intense, but manages still to look pretty good. So in this particular video, we're going to be taking a look at 3 particular settings. We're going to go 10 watt, and then I'm going to push it up to 17 watt and see how far these low settings will get us. We won't quite hit 60 FPS, but we'll get near there. And then we're going to do ultra settings, which I want you to kind of pay attention to this shadow resolution that's happening here. And it's really evident that it's pretty gnarly looking in terms of, for this shadow detail. So it's noticeable that shadows are there, but how they look is not very pleasant. But again, we're running at 10 watts, so we're trying to run as little as possible. We're trying to tax the CPU as little as possible, and shadows are one way that we will get better performance. This is generally a pretty good area because of the draw distance and how far it goes back and how much is being drawn to the screen. What is requested, it's a good demand on CPU and GPU, and then we have a lot of shadows and stuff going on right now, and we get a good detail of how bad aliasing can be. So this is a pretty good look at native resolution with some AA to clean up aliasing. And then we get a pretty good look at shadows, which they are not perfect, but it's not super jarring. But when we go to ultra settings, these become very evident how clean those shadows look. And we get to still run at a 30 FPS rate, even at ultra settings, but we have to bump TDP up. Alrighty, so we are now running at 17 watt here. So if we take a look right there, it shows you that we are running at a higher TDP. In the back end, we are running at 17 watt TDP. Total system power is nearly 21 watts, 21.5 watt. That is a little bit over 2 hours of battery life in this particular configuration. So for 17 watt, generally speaking, if the system needs it and it's being demanded of it, it will basically give you 2 hours of battery life. However, even if you set 17 watt TDP and a game doesn't need it, you'll get significantly better battery life. So you really shouldn't think that setting it to 17 watt TDP is always going to give you 2 hours of battery life. That's not the case, but just something to be mindful of. So once again, we are still running the same settings as I was running at 16 watt. We are running the same settings as I was running at 10 watt, but now we have 17 watt. We can have an easier time hitting 60 FPS, especially when we start drawing less to the screen. But if we take a look at a bigger vista and have that longer draw distance, you can see that we do take a little bit of a hit to FPS, but not terribly so. We'll go down to the high 40s, low 50s. And if we go inside, internal to anything, you will start to see 60s happen far more regularly. At that point, when you're actually indoors and you're hitting a consistent 60 FPS and there's less to draw, during those moments, you will actually have less power usage. So let me actually go try to show that off real quick. Okay, so this is just going to be a quick demonstration just to kind of show you. So you can see that we've locked at 60. The good thing about this particular engine is that when you hit 60 FPS, the demand on the SoC will slow down. So you can see right here, we're at 13.7 watt. So we are not using the full 17 watt. In this particular instance, more like 15 watt that we're actually using. So the system has automatically regulated the amount of power that it needs to use because we've already satisfied hitting a 60 FPS target. At that point, we're 16.6 milliseconds constant, so there's no real reason to constantly feed the CPU and GPU because there's no need for it. Now, in terms of when you turn VSync off or you want to drive to a higher frame rate, then your CPU and GPU are going to need to spend more power to reach that frame rate. But as long as you are in those situations where the draw limit and what's being demanded of the system isn't as much, it will automatically regulate it. In these particular instances, you will get better battery life. So just as an example, this is kind of silly. I went fully into a wall. The TDP went down a bunch. We're using about 14 watt right now, but take a look at total system power. It's using about 17.8 watt. This basically just gave us another 30 minutes to 40 minutes of battery life. So little things like that is kind of what I want to try to address here, is that when I talk about battery life, I often talk about it in worst case scenarios. You might get better battery life as you're playing through a game because you'll be going through tight corridors or what have you, and power will go down at that time. So even though I say 2 hours and 10 minutes, it might be 2 hours and 30 minutes. But if you're just going to be gunning the system at all times, 2 hours and 10 minutes at 17 watt, if we were to bump the TDP down to 10 watt, then you're back up to 3 hours and change. So it's all dependent on what you set the TDP. Hope I made that part clear. At this particular moment, I'm going to quit out of the game, and we're going to go to Ultra settings, and I'm going to go take a look at the game at 17 watt TDP. All right, just so you can see, I'm going to go ahead and click Ultra settings, and we are using the Ultra settings preset quality. We're going to be using 17 watt. Ready. So now let's go ahead and take a look at those shadows once again. You can see how absolutely clean they look. Just really nice looking. Again, this is ultra settings, so when you're looking at it, it's just, you can appreciate it a lot more when you're playing the game. And while I'm looking down right now, so frame rate's pretty good. But when we take in this big vista, and there's a lot to draw here, right? So there's a tremendous amount that needs to get drawn. You're going to be taxing the CPU a bunch. Remember, we're running DirectX 11, so draw calls are still going to be high, and we'll be taxing CPU. And then the GPU needs to also work in tandem with that. So we're using ultra settings at 17 watt in a handheld at 800p full resolution, native resolution, which is still very impressive. But like, even just like, look at the aliasing. Look at how clean that looks. Anyway, this is a really good place to kind of just have just fantastic area to check out aliasing and really appreciate what's going on here, because there's a tremendous amount of work that is happening for the GPU here. So let me know what you guys would prefer in the comments. There is 3 settings that I've shown. Would you prefer the 10 watt and 30 FPS, or the 17 watt 60 FPS or close to 60 FPS, still low settings? Or would you prefer this ultra settings and 17 watt? Even though we're not getting full 30 frames a second, we're clearly above 25 FPS, even in harsh conditions, which we're looking at right now. Anyway, I hope this has been a little bit informative. This has been Fallout 4 running on the Aya Neo. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.